The training hall was quiet in a way that felt almost intentional. Not silent, but controlled. The soft echo of footsteps, the faint sound of breathing, the subtle rustle of uniforms shifting as students adjusted their stance. This was not chaos. This was discipline. Bruce Lee stood at the center of the room, calm and focused, moving with an ease that made every motion look effortless. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was teaching, breaking down movements, correcting angles, explaining why speed meant nothing without timing and power meant nothing without control. The students watched closely. Every word mattered. Every demonstration carried weight. From the side of the room, someone else was watching too. Joe Louis, already known as a serious karate master, observed quietly. His posture was relaxed, arms folded, eyes sharp. He wasn't there to challenge anyone, at least not openly. But his mind was active, measuring everything he saw. The footwork, the distance, the tempo. Bruce Lee moved fast, undeniably fast. But Joe had seen fast before. As Bruce demonstrated a short sequence, his hands cutting through the air with precision, Joe's expression barely changed. Inside, though, a quiet comparison was taking place. He wasn't disrespectful. He wasn't dismissive. He was confident, the kind of confidence built from years of competition, discipline, and victory. The room itself seemed unaware of a shift. Students leaned forward, fully absorbed in the lesson, not realizing that something unspoken had entered the space. There was no tension yet, no visible challenge. Just a subtle change in energy, like the air tightening before a storm that hadn't arrived. Bruce Lee paused briefly, letting the students absorb what they had just seen. His eyes moved across the room, scanning faces, attentive, curious, focused. Then, for a brief moment, his gaze passed Joe Louis. Nothing was said. No signal was given. But something registered. Two men, two masters, two very different philosophies standing in the same room. One teaching, the other observing. What looked like an ordinary class was quietly becoming something else entirely. And no one there realized that this was the moment everything began. Joe Louis remained where he was, leaning slightly against the wall, his presence calm but unmistakable. He didn't interrupt. He didn't step forward. He simply watched. Years of discipline had taught him that true evaluation didn't require noise, only attention. Bruce Lee continued teaching, unaware to most eyes of the silent calculation happening behind him. He spoke about efficiency, about how wasted motion was the enemy of effectiveness. His hands moved slowly now, deliberately, breaking techniques down into their smallest components. Each explanation was precise, almost surgical. Joe noticed everything. The angle of Bruce's shoulders, the way his weight shifted before each movement, the distance he kept between himself and the students. Joe had spent countless hours sparring with champions, facing opponents who relied on speed, power, or aggression. He understood timing. He understood rhythm. And as he observed Bruce Lee, a thought formed, not loud, not arrogant, but steady and persistent. I'm faster, not in everything, not in every way, but in raw speed, the kind measured in fractions of a second, the kind that decided matches before the opponent even realized what had happened. Joe didn't feel threatened. If anything, he felt curious. Bruce Lee's movements were clean, controlled, almost restrained. Joe wondered what would happen if that restraint disappeared. What would happen if Bruce was pushed beyond teaching into reaction? The class continued. Students rotated partners, practicing footwork drills Bruce had just demonstrated. The room filled with movement now. Synchronized steps, controlled strikes, focused repetition. Bruce walked among them, correcting posture here, adjusting balance there. His presence was calm, almost effortless. Joe noticed something else then. Bruce wasn't watching hands or feet alone. He was watching intent. When a student hesitated, Bruce noticed before the hesitation became visible. When someone overcommitted, Bruce corrected them before the mistake fully formed. It wasn't just speed, it was awareness. Joe shifted slightly, his interest sharpening. He had always believed that speed was the ultimate advantage. Faster reaction meant control. Faster execution meant dominance. That belief had carried him far, through competitions, through victories, through respect earned the hard way. But Bruce Lee seemed to operate on a different frequency. There was no rush in him, no wasted urgency. His movements flowed, not because they were fast, but because they were perfectly timed. Joe recognized this, but still, the question lingered. Could timing really overcome speed? Bruce demonstrated another sequence, this time faster, not explosive but fluid. The students struggled to keep up, their eyes tracking his movements, their bodies lagging behind. Joe's gaze narrowed. He mentally replayed the motion, frame by frame. I could intercept that, he thought. I could move first. Bruce stopped and smiled slightly, sensing the students' fatigue. He reminded them that true skill wasn't about winning exchanges, it was about understanding them. He spoke of calm under pressure, of letting go of ego, of responding instead of forcing. The words landed differently for Joe. They weren't defensive. They weren't philosophical fluff. They sounded earned. For the first time, Joe wondered if Bruce Lee already knew what he was thinking. Not because Bruce looked at him, but because Bruce spoke as if he was addressing someone beyond the students. As if the lesson extended further than the room. The air felt heavier now. Still calm, but charged. Joe straightened slightly, uncrossing his arms. The thought returned, clearer than before. I'm faster. But now it carried something else with it. Uncertainty. And that uncertainty was far more unsettling than any challenge. The room settled into a strange rhythm, one that existed beneath the surface of the lesson. To the students, everything still felt structured, purposeful, normal. But for Joe Louis, the atmosphere had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was subtler than that, like a current changing direction under calm water. Bruce Lee finished demonstrating another sequence and stepped back, allowing the students to practice again. He didn't rush them. He never did. He believed pressure revealed truth, but only when applied at the right moment. Joe watched Bruce walk across the room, hands loosely at his sides, posture relaxed. There was no stiffness in him, no visible tension. That alone was unusual. Most instructors carried authority through rigid control. Bruce carried it through ease. Joe had faced many types of fighters. Some relied on intimidation, others on raw aggression. Some hid insecurity behind loud confidence. Bruce Lee did none of that, and that unsettled him. Joe replayed the earlier movements again in his mind. He imagined stepping in, imagined closing distance, imagined striking first. Every scenario ended the same way. Fast, clean, decisive. I would get there first, he told himself. Yet something kept interfering with that conclusion. Bruce wasn't reacting late. He wasn't reacting early. He was reacting exactly when needed. That precision didn't come from speed alone. It came from reading intent before motion, from recognizing patterns before they unfolded. Joe exhaled slowly. Across the room, Bruce stopped beside one of the students and adjusted their stance. His voice was calm, instructional. He spoke about balance, not just physical but mental, about how anticipation could betray you if it wasn't disciplined. Joe felt those words land closer than he expected. Was Bruce speaking generally, or was he speaking to someone specific? Joe reminded himself not to project meaning where there was none. He had built his reputation on clarity, not imagination. Still, the timing felt deliberate. The class moved on to controlled reaction drills. Students stood facing one another, instructed to respond only after recognizing clear intent. No guessing, no preemptive strikes. Bruce emphasized restraint. Speed without control is noise, he said evenly. Control turns speed into clarity. Joe's jaw tightened slightly. He respected the philosophy. He really did. But philosophy didn't always survive reality. In competition, milliseconds mattered. In real encounters, hesitation could cost everything. Joe had lived that truth. And yet, Bruce Lee didn't sound like a man who avoided reality. Bruce demonstrated the drill himself, inviting one of the senior students forward. He stood relaxed, hands open, body still. The student hesitated, unsure when to move. Bruce waited, completely still. No tension, no anticipation. Then, the student stepped forward. Bruce moved, not explosively, Not aggressively, just enough. A shift of weight, a slight turn. The student froze, caught mid-action, suddenly unsure how they had lost position so quickly. The room murmured softly. Joe leaned forward, his attention fully locked now. Bruce smiled gently and reset, explaining that the movement wasn't about beating the student's speed, it was about entering the moment before the student fully committed, before the action became unavoidable. Joe's thoughts raced. That's not reaction time, he realized. That's prediction. Bruce repeated the drill again and again, each time stopping the student effortlessly. No struggle, no dominance, just control. Joe felt something unfamiliar creep in. Not doubt, but challenge. He had believed speed was the deciding factor, that whoever arrived first controlled the outcome. But Bruce Lee was arriving at the decision point before arrival itself, operating one step earlier in the sequence. Joe's confidence didn't disappear, but it adjusted. He crossed his arms again, grounding himself. I'm faster, he reminded himself. But now the statement felt incomplete. Bruce finished the demonstration and turned back to the class. His eyes swept the room briefly, and this time they stopped, just for a second, on Joe Louis. The look wasn't confrontational. It wasn't curious. It was calm, acknowledging, as if Bruce recognized the unspoken dialogue that had been unfolding all along. Then Bruce looked away, continuing the lesson without comment. But for Joe, that moment lingered, because now he was certain of one thing. Bruce Lee wasn't unaware. He knew exactly what Joe was thinking, and whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be about who was faster. The realization stayed with Joe Louis longer than he expected. Bruce Lee continued teaching as if nothing had happened, moving through the room with the same calm authority, correcting students, refining techniques, answering questions with patience. But for Joe, the lesson had quietly shifted. He was no longer just observing a class. He was watching a mind at work. Joe had spent his life reading opponents. He could sense hesitation, aggression, fear. He knew when someone wanted to prove something. But Bruce Lee didn't give off any of those signals. There was no edge to him, no defensive energy, no desire to assert dominance. And that absence was unsettling. Joe adjusted his stance, standing straighter now. He felt an odd pull, not toward confrontation, but toward clarity. He wanted to understand what Bruce Lee truly operated on. Speed, yes. Timing, clearly. But there was something deeper beneath it all. Bruce gathered the students closer, signaling for a pause. He spoke about intent again, how most people revealed their next move long before they acted. A shift in breath, a tightening of his shoulders, a decision made internally before it became physical. By the time most people move, Bruce said calmly, they've already told you everything. Joe felt a slow nod form before he caught himself. That was true. He knew it was true, but hearing it stated so simply, without ego, stripped the idea down to its essence. Bruce invited the students to pair up again, this time instructing them to exaggerate their intent before moving. The drill wasn't about winning or losing. It was about awareness, about recognizing the moment intention became commitment. Joe watched closely. One student moved too early. Another hesitated too long. Bruce corrected both. His feedback was precise, never harsh. He didn't shame mistakes, he used them. Joe noticed something else now. Bruce wasn't trying to prove anything to the room, not even subconsciously. He taught as if the truth would speak for itself. That kind of confidence was rare. Joe thought back to his own training, the endless repetitions, the pressure of competition, the moments where speed had saved him. Speed had always been his edge, the thing that separated him from others at the highest level. But Bruce Lee seemed to exist beyond edges. Joe took a step forward, closer to the training area. He didn't announce himself. He didn't interrupt. He simply moved into clearer view. Bruce noticed immediately, not with surprise, but with acceptance. He finished correcting a student and turned slightly toward Joe, acknowledging his presence without shifting the focus of the class. It was subtle, respectful. Joe felt a quiet tension rise, not aggressive, but anticipatory. Bruce demonstrated another concept now, this time emphasizing stillness. He stood facing a student and instructed them to move whenever they felt ready. Bruce did nothing. No feints. No signals. Seconds passed. Then, suddenly, the student stepped forward. Bruce moved first, not because he reacted faster, but because he moved before the student fully realized they had committed. The exchange ended instantly, cleanly. No impact, just positioning. Joe's eyes narrowed. That shouldn't be possible, he thought. And yet, it had just happened. Bruce explained that speed often came too late, that the real advantage existed in recognizing intention as it formed. He spoke about letting go of the need to be first, and instead learning to be present. Joe felt the words press against something deep in him. He had built his career on being first. But what if being first wasn't the same as being right? The class began to wind down. Students wiped sweat from their brows, quietly discussing what they had learned. Bruce thanked them, his tone relaxed, almost casual. Joe waited. As the room started to clear, Bruce finally turned fully toward him. Their eyes met. No challenge, no test, just acknowledgement between two men who knew exactly where the other stood. Bruce smiled slightly, not a smile of victory, a smile of understanding. And in that moment, Joe Louis realized something that unsettled him more than any opponent ever had. Bruce Lee wasn't trying to prove he was faster. He was showing that speed was never the point. And whatever lesson came next, Joe knew it was going to change the way he understood combat forever. The room was almost empty now. Most of the students had left, their conversations fading down the hallway, their minds still processing what they had just witnessed. The training hall felt larger without them, quieter, heavier, the kind of quiet where thoughts become louder than movement. Joe Louis remained where he was. Bruce Lee began putting away training equipment, unhurried, methodical. There was no rush in him, no sense of urgency to address the moment that had been building for over an hour. He moved as though time itself had slowed to match his rhythm. Joe finally spoke. "Your students are disciplined," he said evenly. Bruce looked up, meeting Joe's eyes with calm attentiveness. "They're learning," he replied. "Discipline comes later." Joe nodded slowly. "You teach awareness more than technique." Bruce smiled faintly, as if the observation pleased him. "Technique changes," he said. "Awareness stays." The silence returned, but this time it was different, no longer distant. Now it sat between them, charged with mutual respect and unspoken curiosity. Joe stepped a little closer. "I've seen speed," he said. "A lot of it. I've relied on it my entire career." Bruce listened without interrupting, his posture open, relaxed. "But what you're doing," Joe continued, "it feels like you're operating before speed even matters." Bruce considered this, then nodded slightly. "Speed is a result," he said, "not a decision." Joe felt that land hard. He had always trained to reduce reaction time, to sharpen reflexes, to arrive first. But Bruce Lee wasn't reducing reaction. He was removing the need for it entirely. Joe exhaled slowly. "Most fighters," Bruce continued, "wait for confirmation. They wait until the moment is obvious. By then, it's already late." Joe's brow furrowed. "And you don't wait." "No," Bruce replied gently. "I listen." Joe almost laughed, not in mockery, but disbelief. "Listen to what?" Bruce gestured subtly toward Joe's chest. "That." Joe froze. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, and yet Bruce had pointed directly at the tension Joe didn't even realize he was carrying. Bruce continued. "Before the body moves, the mind commits. Before the mind commits, emotion shifts. Breath changes. Intention leaks." Joe felt exposed, not threatened, but seen. He had faced opponents who tried to overpower him, others who tried to intimidate him. None had ever dismantled his certainty without laying a hand on him. Joe straightened. "You're saying speed doesn't win." Bruce shook his head. "Speed wins races," he said. "Understanding wins encounters." The words echoed in the empty room. Joe took another step forward. Not aggressive, not challenging, just honest. "What happens," he asked, "when someone truly is faster?" Bruce didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved, not toward Joe, just enough to shift the space between them. His foot repositioned slightly, his shoulders aligned. His hands remained relaxed, open. Joe felt it instantly. Not danger. Possibility. Bruce stopped. Then I don't race them, he said quietly. I arrive where they're going. Joe's pulse quickened. He realized then that Bruce Lee wasn't teaching students how to fight. He was teaching them how to think. Joe imagined himself stepping in at full speed. And for the first time, he saw how that speed could be guided, redirected, neutralized. Not through force, but through timing so precise it bordered on inevitability. Joe swallowed. I thought I was faster, he admitted. Bruce nodded, accepting the statement without judgment. You probably are, he said. That response surprised Joe. But speed isn't a threat, Bruce continued. Only misunderstanding is. They stood there for a moment longer, two masters from different paths, meeting at a shared realization. Joe felt something shift inside him. Not pride wounded, not confidence broken, but perspective widened. He had come into the room believing speed was the ultimate truth. He was leaving with a question far more powerful. What if speed was only the surface? Bruce turned back to the equipment, signaling the end of the moment without dismissing it. As Joe walked toward the exit, he paused. Next time, he said, I'd like to learn more. Bruce smiled, not wide, not triumphant, just knowing. Any time, he said, and as Joe Louis stepped out into the fading light, he understood something clearly for the first time. He wasn't leaving challenged. He was leaving transformed. The next session didn't feel like a coincidence. Joe Louis arrived earlier than usual, the training hall still quiet, the air cool and untouched. He hadn't planned it this way. At least, that's what he told himself. But something from the previous encounter lingered in his mind, refusing to settle. He stood near the edge of the mat, arms relaxed at his sides, watching Bruce Lee prepare the space. There were no students yet, no audience, no structure to hide behind, just two men. Bruce noticed Joe immediately, offering a simple nod. No surprise, no expectation, just presence. You're early, Bruce said calmly. Joe nodded. I didn't want to interrupt the class this time. Bruce smiled faintly. Good. Then we can talk before noise arrives. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't demand filling. Joe felt the tension he usually carried begin to loosen, not because he was relaxing, but because Bruce wasn't pressing. Joe finally spoke. I've been thinking about what you said. Bruce didn't respond right away. He waited, not as a tactic, but as a habit. About speed being a result, Joe continued. Not a decision. Bruce nodded slowly. And Joe hesitated. If that's true, then most of what we train for comes too late. Bruce's eyes softened slightly. Yes. Joe exhaled through his nose. That's hard to accept when speed has saved you your whole life. Bruce turned fully toward him now. Speed saved you because you understood distance, he said. And timing. You just named it something else. Joe frowned. He wanted to disagree, but couldn't. Bruce stepped onto the mat and gestured for Joe to join him. No strikes, he said gently. No competition. Joe stepped forward, heart steady but alert. Bruce positioned himself casually, hands open, weight balanced. Move whenever you feel ready, he said. Joe waited. He had never liked waiting. His instinct screamed to act, to test, to push, to initiate. But this time he stayed still. He observed Bruce's breathing, his posture, the space between them. Nothing changed. Seconds passed. Then Joe shifted his weight, not to move, but to prepare. Bruce moved. Joe felt it before he understood it. Bruce wasn't faster. He was earlier. Not earlier in motion, but earlier in decision. His body had responded to Joe's internal commitment before Joe himself had fully registered it. Joe stopped, stunned. Bruce smiled gently. Again, they reset. Joe tried a different approach. He stayed loose. He relaxed his shoulders. He told himself he wouldn't commit. Bruce stayed still. Joe inhaled, just a little deeper. Bruce moved again. Joe laughed under his breath. You're reading breath. Bruce nodded. Breath is honesty. Joe tried once more, this time forcing stillness, masking intention, controlling breath. This time, Bruce didn't move. Joe stepped forward. Bruce responded instantly. Not forcefully, but decisively, repositioning just enough to end the exchange before it began. Joe stepped back, shaking his head slowly. That wasn't speed, Joe said. Bruce nodded. No, it wasn't even reaction. Bruce's smile widened slightly. Now you see it. Joe felt a strange mix of emotions rise: frustration, awe, excitement. He wasn't losing. He wasn't being beaten. He was being shown something. Something deeper than technique. They continued for several more rounds. No strikes. No dominance. Just exploration. Each time, Joe learned something new about how intention leaked, how commitment shaped movement, how urgency betrayed control. Eventually, Bruce stepped back. That's enough. Joe nodded, breathing steadily. You've changed how I see engagement. Bruce shrugged lightly. You were already close. You just trusted speed more than silence. Joe smiled, a genuine one. I thought speed was my edge. Bruce met his gaze. It still is, he said. Now it has direction. The students began to arrive, voices filling the hall, energy returning. Joe stepped off the mat, mind racing. He realized then that this wasn't about proving who was faster. It was about understanding when speed mattered and when it didn't. As Bruce turned to greet the students, Joe took his place among them. Not as a challenger, not as an observer, but as a student, ready to relearn everything he thought he knew. And that realization stayed with him longer than any victory ever had. The final part of the story didn't end with a fight. It didn't end with a dramatic knockout, or a public defeat, or a moment of humiliation. It ended with something far more powerful, a quiet shift in understanding. Joe Louis stood among the students, listening to Bruce Lee's words. The room buzzed with energy again, the familiar sounds of training returning. But Joe wasn't hearing it the same way anymore. He heard the deeper layers. He heard how Bruce spoke not just to the body, but to the mind. He heard how the lessons weren't about overpowering someone. They were about seeing them before they moved. The concept had begun as a challenge. It had become a lesson, and now it was becoming a realization. Joe had always believed the fastest fighter won. He had built his identity around that belief. It had carried him through competitions and recognition. It had been his shield and his weapon. But watching Bruce teach and experiencing the moment when Bruce responded before Joe fully committed, Joe understood something that shook him to the core. Speed wasn't the highest truth. Perception was. Bruce moved not because he was faster, but because he understood the story before it happened. He read the intent, the emotion, the tiny shift in breath that gave away a decision. He didn't wait for the action to arrive. He arrived at the moment before the action. That was the real difference. Joe's mind replayed the moment over and over. He remembered the first time Bruce moved before he even decided. The way his body felt when he realized he had been outpaced not in speed, but in understanding. It wasn't humiliating. It was humbling. And that humility was strangely freeing. Because for the first time in his life, Joe saw that his strength didn't have to be limited to speed. It could expand into awareness, into timing, into understanding the rhythm of a moment. Bruce finished the class and gathered the students for a final word. He spoke about the importance of learning without ego, about how the moment you believe you know everything, you stop growing. Joe listened, absorbing every sentence. When the class ended, students began to leave. The hall emptied again, but this time, Joe didn't feel the weight of emptiness. He felt the weight of possibility. Bruce approached him. No tension, no test, just calm presence. You changed your mind, Bruce said simply. Joe nodded. Not my mind, he replied. My understanding. Bruce smiled, satisfied. Good. Joe looked at Bruce with a mix of respect and something like gratitude. You didn't need to prove anything to me, he said. But you did. Bruce shook his head. I didn't prove anything, he said quietly. I only showed you what you were already capable of seeing. Joe paused, thinking. Then he asked, what do you call that? That awareness. Bruce's eyes softened. I call it being present, he said. The rest is just speed. Joe took a slow breath, feeling the truth of it. He realized that in a fight, in life, in every moment where the world demands you act, the first victory isn't landing a strike. It's seeing the moment clearly enough to know what to do. He turned toward the exit, then looked back once more. Thank you, Joe said. Bruce nodded, And for the first time, Joe saw a kind of peace in him. Not from winning, not from proving anything, but from teaching truth. As Joe walked out of the hall, he understood the most important lesson of all. The moment you stop racing to be first, you begin to arrive at the right time. And that is when real power begins.